We return again to the scene of reading. We've been talking lots about scenes of reading. We saw it in Homer, we saw it in Virgil. We'll continue to see it in great works that the works themselves either write about reading, dramatize reading, show scenes of reading. In Christian texts, starting with Augustine, it changes a little bit. So here's Augustine, I think in book 2, and he's writing about, let's start with 14. On a certain day then, when Nebridius was away, for some reason I cannot remember, there came to visit Alypius and me at our house one Pantacinus, or whatever, a fellow countryman of ours from Africa who held high office in the emperor's court. What he wanted with us, I do not know, but we sat down to talk together, and the chance that he noticed a book on a game table before us. Notice the background of empire and gaming. He took it up, opened it, and contrary to his expectation, found it to be the Apostle Paul, for he imagined that it was one of my wearisome rhetoric textbooks. So note just the way in which Augustine tells this simple story, how he's setting himself apart from gaming, rhetoric, and empire. At this, he looked up at me with a smile and expressed his delight and wonder that he had so unexpectedly found this book, and only this one lying before my eyes, for he was indeed a Christian and a faithful one at that. And often he prostrated himself before the our God in the church in constant daily prayer. When I had told him that he had given much attention to these writings, when I had told him that I had given much attention to these writings, a conversation followed in which he spoke of Anthony, the Egyptian monk, whose name was in high repute among thy servants, although up to that time not familiar to me. Remember, we read about a certain Aeneas that Augustine is forced to read about. And now we're hearing about Antony, an anonymous Egyptian monk. When he learned this, he lingered on the topic, giving us an account of this eminent man and marveling at our ignorance. How do we not know Antony? I keep on thinking of the Antony of the Aeneid here as well, also in Egypt, but a very different one. We in turn were amazed to hear of thy wonderful work so fully manifest in recent times, almost in our own, occurring in the true faith of the Catholic Church. So here Augustine is seeing his friend reading a book, and then they tell the story of Anthony. From this, the conversation turned to the multitudes in the monasteries and their manners so fragrant to thee, and the teeming solitudes of the wilderness of which we knew nothing at all. Notice again the way in which Augustine is appropriating different terms for his monastic interest. The multitudes, we think of multitudes in the desert or multitudes at the Red Sea. In the monasteries, and their manners so fragrant, their offerings, and this teeming solitudes of the wilderness, there you go, of which we knew nothing at all. Augustine continues. He went on with his story, and we listened intently and in silence. He then told us how, on a certain afternoon at Trier, when the emperor was occupied watching the gladiatorial games, he and 3 comrades went out for a walk in the gardens close to the city walls. Notice again, the emperor is busy with games, and Augustine is busy with something far more important. There, as they chanced to walk 2 by 2, one strolled away with him while the other went on by themselves. As they rambled, these first 2 came upon a certain cottage where lived some of thy servants, some of the poor in spirit, where they found the book in which was written the life of Anthony. It's something about the spread of the book, the spread of the word, people in monasteries, the mention of a book, the mention of a person, and then finding that person in a book, the good news of Christianity spreading, and the necessity of reading. One of them began to read it, to marvel and to be inflamed by it. While reading, he meditated on embracing just such a life, giving up his worldly employment to seek thee alone. These 2 belong to the group of officials called Secret Service agents. Then suddenly being overwhelmed with a holy love and a sober shame, and as if in anger with himself, he fixed his eyes on his friends, exclaiming, tell me, I beg you, what goal are we seeking with all this toil of ours? What is it that we desire? What is our motive in public service? Can our hopes in the court rise higher than to be friends of the emperor? But how frail, how beset with peril is that pride? Though through what dangers must we climb to a greater danger, and when shall we succeed? But if I choose to become a friend of God, see, I can become one now. Thus he spoke, and in the pangs of the travail of the new life, he turned his eyes again onto the page and continued reading. I think that's probably the most important part we've read so far. He turned his eyes again onto the page and continued reading. He was inwardly changed. We talked about Augustine's empire of the interior. He was inwardly changed, as thou didst see, and the world dropped away from his mind, as soon became plain to others. We see him, we read him, reading, and see that transformation. But up until this point, Augustine is watching others read. And now we pick it up at 17. But now the more ardently I love those whose wholesome affections I heard reported, that they had given themselves up wholly to thee to be cured, the more did I abhor myself when compared with them. For many of my years, perhaps 12, had passed away since my 19th, when upon the reading of Cicero's Hortensius, I was roused to a desire for wisdom. This is an intellectual autobiography, Augustine telling when he first started reading. And here I was still postponing the abandonment of this world's happiness to devote myself to the search. And we see the struggle here. And we shouldn't lose sight, as was pointed out in our chat, that Augustine, we feel the drama from the point of view of his present. But we also feel the moment of his uncertainty, which again is what makes it such a great memoir, is we don't lose the sense of the uncertainty of the present. For not just the finding alone, but also the bare search for it ought to have been preferred above the treasures and kingdoms of this world, better than all bodily pleasures, though they were to be had for the taking. And here Augustine says that reading is better than any other kind of pleasure. And here we're not just talking about a scene of reading, that is the suitors reading the sign from above, or Virgil reading the story of his history on the walls of Carthage. Here we have the continued process of reading, and this is what's different in the Western Christian world that Augustine helps to create, that reading is a continual process. But wretched youth that I was, supremely wretched, even the very outset of my youth, I had entreated chastity of thee and had prayed, grant me chastity and continence, but not yet. That's the great Augustine line. Grant me chastity and continence, but not yet. And we feel in that line the attachment to this world, the attachment to all of the things of his adolescent, sexuality, sin, transgression. He wants chastity and continence, but still he wants the pleasures of the moment. But finally, there is that scene of where Augustine himself takes up reading. And this is the last passage in our discussion today. Here we go. Number 29, I was saying these things and weeping. Here's a tomorrow and tomorrow before Shakespeare and Macbeth. Why not now? Why not this very hour? Make an end to my uncleanness. I was saying these things and weeping in the most bitter contrition of my heart, when suddenly I heard the voice of a boy or a girl. I know not which, it doesn't matter. It's uncertain. Remember, it's just like he feels like he's fed by God through the breast of his mother. Here, the boy or the girl is just the agent. I heard the voice of a boy or a girl, I know not which, coming from the neighboring house, chanting over and over again, pick it up, read it, pick it up, read it. Immediately, I ceased weeping and began most earnestly to think whether it was usual for children in some kind of game to sing such a song. Is this just another game, Augustine thinks? But I could not remember ever having heard the like. So damning the torrent of my tears, I got to my feet, for I could not but think that this was a divine command to open the Bible and read the first passage I should light upon. For I had heard how Antony, there he is, he appears again, accidentally coming into church while the gospel was being read, received the admonition as if it was read, had been addressed to him. Go and see what you have and give it to the poor, and you shall have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me. By such an oracle, he was forthwith converted to the, here again, he's talking about somebody else, but also talking about the way in which every passage of the Bible and every action in life addresses him. So I will quickly return to the bench where Alpius was sitting, for there I had put down the Apostles' Book when I had left it there. I snatched it up, opened it, and in silence read the paragraph on which my eyes first fell. We talked about Ambrose. Augustine watches Ambrose reading silently, and here he also reads silently. This is his internal world. This is not for anybody else but himself, and this verse speaks to him, not in rioting and drunkenness, not in chambering and wantonness, not in strife and envying, but put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh to fulfill the lusts thereof. It's important here, Augustine feels that the verse addresses who he is, but I think what's more important is that Augustine feels or writes that this book always addresses somebody in some way. Again, in Virgil and in Homer, we see moments of reading. For Augustine, following Ambrose, the silent reader, following Antony, following the community of readers about which he writes, it becomes a life of reading. That is the way a person lives. That is the way a person conquers his own interior empire. This is not Aeneas. This is not Odysseus. They read and they learn how to read. And even in those works, we spoke about the way in which the Greek work, we know the end. The Augustine individual is always in the middle, never knows the end, and is always, always in the process of reading. He's part of a community of readers. He sees himself defined by his reading. He sees reading as the process which continually transforms him. And as readers of Augustine, we join him in that community.